Humans Don't Hibernate, Part 17. A story by user JCB112. I mean, can you think of a better way to start off the morning? Veer spoke in that borderline ecstatic tone that had come to define the past few minutes following our timely escape. One that I was thankful for, yes, but that had to come at the price of my whole body going into an intense fight-or-flight response that now kept me glued to my seat like a Duranian headlights. Incapable of any movement, unable to even budge, as the AI's platform continuously shimmied back and forth in place in a strange display of jubilant celebration. I could think of several better ways to start off my morning. I spoke in no uncertain terms. A drained cadence stretched through each and every one of my words as a damper was effectively placed on the whole situation. Only for Veer to tear it right back off, with that smile that had now made itself at home on his faceplate. To each their own then, but personally, seeing a patchwork plan put into action, followed by a flawed but effective execution, it stirs something within me. I don't know what it is, but there's a latent... The closest organic equivalent would be... instinct? There's an underlying series of codes that makes up who and what I am. And it's this very series of codes that instills in me so much satisfaction upon seeing a plan successfully put into action. The complications along the way add to this feedback loop, and that stirs something else within me, as if compiling all this new data allows me to anticipate and make predictions much easier, making any future encounter of similar contextual parameters to be more accurately assessed for an even more effective plan of attack. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away again. The AI finally seemed to calm down by the end of his tirade, as by now he seemed squarely focused on the only other subject present in his immediate line of sight, me. I stared back at Veer with a decidedly indifferent expression, culminating in a rather ineloquent response on my end. What? You okay there? You haven't budged in since we jumped. Veer pulled up a holographic projection of a datapad, using it as a prop of sorts for his interactions. And I can confirm you've literally been still for the past 2.5 minutes. Yes, I'm alright. What I'm experiencing right now is, well, it's an act of weakness to really talk about it. It's actually quite taboo to really touch on. I attempted to formulate a coherent response to the matter at hand, as I tripped over my words, bumbling over my thoughts, before finally letting out a deep sigh of defeat. Extreme stress, fight or flight. Look it up in your databanks. You must have some entries on it if you already have a Veneran medical textbook on hand. I responded back with an uncharacteristically succinct series of disjointed sentences, explaining all of it in rapid-fire pace. I grimaced as I realized what had just happened, realizing that I once again allowed for my inner anxieties to get the best of me. I expected the ensuing response to once again resemble the previous few interactions we've had, chock full of long emotional back and forths on our respective states of being. But that didn't happen. You know, I don't think we actually ever got to sit down to talk. Veer spoke nonchalantly. What do you mean? I quite vividly remember us having 2 heart-to-hearts 2 days in a row since my awakening. Wouldn't that classify as a talk in your book? I inquired back, genuinely curious as to the AI's thought process, as the virtual being chirped back a response almost immediately. Those were essential channels of dialogue, necessary for us to gauge one another's mental and emotional states for the express purpose of ensuring one another's survival in an utterly alien landscape. I don't discount what we've bonded over thus far, don't get me wrong, but there's a difference between bonding in that sense and what I'm referring to here. The fact that we haven't actually had a chance to sit down and just talk like normal people. Not 2 individuals caught in the middle of an existential reality-shattering fight for survival. Veer seemed to pause for a moment at that, his faceplate shifting to a series of 3 dots that blinked in rapid succession for a few moments before continuing. I mean, we're still technically on the ball in that regard, but we've reached a point where we can let our hair down a little, or head frills in your case. Regardless, what I mean to say is I think it's time we take a proper step back from all this insanity. Not just to de-stress before another debrief, and not just to rest before another mission, but to actually, take a step back to properly unpack things, you know? Just talk. There was a genuine sense of care present throughout his entire speech, one that resonated with me far more than I would have liked to admit. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps we were both running purely on adrenaline, and the desire to regain our bearings in this bizarre reality we both found ourselves thrust into. Perhaps it was time to take a step back. Whatever it was, the very concept of some semblance of normalcy returning to my life brought me back from the brink. The adrenaline that had spiked for the past few minutes had either passed through my system or had been dulled by the prospects of this aforementioned return to normalcy. I concede, you have a point there, Veer. A very good point, if I may add. I finally felt my muscles relaxing, and my whole body just melting into the seat, clearly designed with human ergonomics in mind. Another awkward silence descended over the both of us, as it was clear one of us would need to step forward to make this work. But breaking the ice, even under normal circumstances, was one of the most infamously difficult things to do. It was with this that the silence was unexpectedly broken by the AI in question. A simple, amicable expression now proudly displayed across his faceplate, as he began what was in effect our first real conversation. I guess I'll start. Hi, I'm Veer. I'm an emergent intelligence formerly part of the United Nations Uniformed Services in the capacity of ship overseer to one Captain Alyssa Baines of the USNV Enduring Justice. Sometime between my questionable service and the present, I participated in the Great Civil War of the Nine Virtual Constructs, siding with the titular Nine Virtual Constructs. This culminated in a total defeat on my end, and my eventual sentencing, where I was assigned to penal guard duty over Hibernation Conduit 27A, assigned to oversee the hibernation of a certain Lasara Ta'el Parfundinier. My memories have been restored somewhat via the satellite we just hit up, but that awkward gap still exists between my service on the UNSV Enduring Justice and the Great Civil War. It never once occurred to me just how much I overlooked my AI companion's lengthy history. Indeed, it was one that beckoned a strange sense of anguish when juxtaposed to the short, fleeting lives of the humans we had both just had the privilege of meeting. I don't know why that thought, that feeling, that idea came to mind, but it just did. Is it really necessary to reintroduce yourself in that manner? I attempted to circumvent my own end of the conversation, as well as these troubling thoughts, by addressing just how ludicrous this conversation starter sounded. I mean, think about it, Lasara. Have we actually sat down to introduce ourselves? Not including the automated pre-recorded junk that I was scripted to say upon your awakening. Besides, you weren't really in the most pro-AI mood up until very recently, so yeah. The AI seemed to shrug purposefully at the end of that explanation. I attempted to thwart that line of reasoning, I really did. I racked my head over the tumultuous events of the past few days, only to come up empty-handed. Not even during our downtimes did we really sit down to exchange personal pleasantries. It was with this realization that I decided to reciprocate in kind, readjusting myself to look at least somewhat presentable given my current state. A holdover mentally from what was probably a bygone era now. Hello, Veer. I am Lasara Ta'el Parfundinier, of the Denari clan. I serve, well, perhaps served would be a more apt descriptor given the circumstances, in the Veneran armed forces in a non-combat capacity. My primary mission for the past few 100,000 years now was the analysis and risk assessment of Elurus, what your humans seem to call Earth. I wasn't the head researcher by any means. Such roles were occupied by the ranks of our middling nobility, not a minor noble such as myself. But I was for all intents and purposes one of the leading researchers in the field of ecological malignancy, a term we use for organic forms of life in an isolated ecosystem that lack a hibernative cycle. I began backtracking at this point, trying my darndest to paint my life in a manner that best summed it all up. But all of it ended up in the same gut-wrenching conclusion that I'd kept to myself for years. The fact that I had nothing to sum up. The fact I had no true sense of direction, even if it looked like I did. I debated going into this with Veer for what felt like entire minutes. The entirety of my life staring back at me with a deceivingly simple yet existential question. Is that it? I've spent hundreds of thousands of years, millennia, and centuries navigating the intricacies of Veneran society, and its endless maze of esotericism. But what did I truly have to show for it? What had I accomplished that could rival a single human lifetime? Elijah, or even Mitchell, and the litany of his descendants that had ascended through the ranks in what was effectively a fraction of my lifetime. Frighteningly, perhaps most concerningly, even if the lifetimes of all of Elijah's descendants were added up, that would account for perhaps half or even 3/4 of my own, relatively short and youthful Veneran life. Beyond this, however, beyond even the existential doubts humanity's mere existence brought upon me, was another, perhaps more personal question that I'd evaded for years. What was I even doing? I wasn't playing the nobility game. I wasn't even playing the academic game right. I'd barely made it through the academy, and so the entirety of my military life could be summed up with a single pathetic pin on my chest. My family was estranged from me because of my desire to leave the endless rat race that was the life of a minor noble. Yet my academic fellows couldn't fully respect me due to my relatively short experience and lifespan, not to mention my house lacking any true holdings in academia. I wasn't a good Veneran. I was far from it. But maybe that was the point. Maybe in some ironic twist of fate, the sole Veneran left carrying the Veneran legacy was the least Veneran of them all. I let out another deep sigh after racking my head through all of this. Ironically, for the first time in millennia, beginning to take stock of just all of it. But I didn't let it get to me. Perhaps it was the new reality I was thrust into. Perhaps it was the revelation of my place in the grander scheme of things compared to Elijah, humanity, and even Veer. But I felt strangely at peace with myself. It wasn't so much that I was happy about it by any means, but it wasn't something for me to cry over. It wasn't something that would yet again bring me to the point of emotional turmoil. It was just something I needed to accept. And perhaps, something that Veer could hear. Throughout this entire internal dialogue, the AI had been surprisingly silent, as if understanding that whatever to come next was something that I needed to work through. It was with this that I shifted in my seat somewhat, adjusting myself as I now brought my gaze back to the AI's faceplate and spoke. "I'm not a model Veneran," I admitted. "Far from it. Our society is one that's built over hundreds of millions of years of internal stratification and turmoil. It's one that places emphasis on the elders, whom we're now figuring out have potentially colluded with the interlopers for who knows how long, and it's a society that I refused to participate in, even all those years ago." I began shifting in my seat, gaining purchase against the table in front of me. The Drenari clan was a minor noble house, Veer. Unlike the common perceptions of nobility in many other parts of the galaxy, however, the nobility in our society is far less exclusive than what you might imagine. I'm not sure how human society works, but what we call minor noble houses are simply families who either own an arbitrary area of land on a core world, or individuals who have somehow, in some way, at some point in history, distinguished themselves in a line of service, be it military, academic, civil servant, or what have you. The fact we don't really die out in the human sense, not from old age, but en masse from hibernation, means that you have a constantly increasing population of nobles that simply add on more to their houses over time. The minor nobility, for instance, constitutes nearly 25% of the entire Veneran population from when I was last awake. Contrast this with the 5% for the middling, the 1% for the upper, and the 0.2% for the elder nobility, respectively. We weren't special, but we thought we were. And perhaps this was a ploy to make it so that we bickered amongst ourselves, rather than changing the system we were stuck in. But I digress. I let out another sigh, taking to my feet as I stepped closer towards the front of the bridge, looking out at the beads of light that passed us by like raindrops against the windshield of a moving train. My house was one of the oldest of the minor nobility, and we were trying everything to elevate ourselves out of that position into the ranks of the middling. I was the middle child of the Drenari clan. The only reason for that being that my string of failures led the family patriarch to the fateful decision to spawn in more offspring to offset my failures. Failures stemming from my refusal to play a part in the rat race that was a noble's life. I raised a single hand, stifling an exasperated sigh as I continued on, unabated. I thought that the military was my ticket out of it, into a society and a culture that cherished merit over name and title. I was wrong. The very fact I was a noble meant that I was inherently thrust into military noble dynamics, set against the long-established noble houses within the military command structure. I then left the combat arm of the military, joining the military academic branch instead. Yet there too I found entrenched noble houses within the ranks of academia. But at that point I couldn't leave. I was too far in, and it was just yet another rat race. I pinched the bridge of my nose, my hands firm, not even trembling one bit as I collected myself. I feel like my whole life has just whizzed by me, decision after decision to leave, leading to just increasing entrenchment into a society that just didn't work. And, ironically, I now see why it was so mismanaged. Why it seemed like nothing was getting done. I don't know how much I can blame this on the interlopers, but I can see how the way Veneran society is organized would have helped to further our continued stagnation for whatever malicious ends they were planning. I took a seat on the helm's console, the very place where I felt the winds of fate beginning to blow in the other direction, the very place where I was finally thrust into a position where I had the handle on my own destiny. Not the elders, not the noble systems, not the interlopers. A place where for the first time in my life, my own continued existence, was placed into my hands. Yet, as bizarre and dangerous as the situation really is, as outlandish and existentially draining every moment of it seems to be, in some strange, almost twisted way, this has been the very first time in my life I've ever felt truly alive. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story, and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.